Greetings, programs, and welcome to another episode of Thumb Wars Presents Blistered Reviews. I'm your host, Sean Cronenfeld, and hark! Who is that figure swinging through the air above your head? Why, I do believe it's Spider-Man. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out! Here comes the Spider-Man. Is he strong? Listen, bud. He's got radioactive blood. Can he swing from a thread? Take a look overhead. Hey there goes the Spider-Man. In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward. To him, life is a great big bang up. Wherever there's a hang up, you'll find the Spider-Man. Alright. I know I promised you guys I would never sing again on the show, but here's the thing. I lied. Also, I shift all blame to Johnny Maloney and Austin Yorsky, largely because I can. Anyways, that's enough shenanigans from me for one episode, and so instead, let's get down to brass tacks and take a look at how the latest video game based off of everyone's favorite wall crawler ended up faring.
The Kingpin pulls the strings on every operation in the city, and he's after you. The bad news is, he hired me to kill you.
Make an example of you! You brought this on yourself! He's fought for his life since he was a boy. This is why you will lose. You underestimate him. Fancies himself a hero, but he's let crime run rampant. If you show even a moment's weakness, he will see it and stop you.
"2012's The Amazing Spider-Man" from developer Beenox and publisher Activision marked the first time the former went so far as to produce an actual full-on open-world Spider-Man title, following on from two previously successful yet linear Spidey games. And it was a decision that basically paid off thanks to ASM ending up as a better-than-average game, especially as licensed titles go. Still, there were some serious flaws with it that kept it from reaching the true heights of superhero video game genre, i.e. the Arkham games, but with the release of Amazing Spider-Man 2 earlier this week, Beenox now has a chance to make good on the promise they've been seemingly falling short of for years now. Sadly, though, for every step forward this new game manages, it takes an equal step back, and what we are left with is a title no better than its predecessor, I'll bet for different reasons. The good: combat, stealth sequences, story missions, web swinging, environments, audio. The bad: hero or menace meter, actual story, character models, animations, side activities, general visuals. The ugly: trying to figure out how Peter Parker can have a bulky, muscular build out of costume and the lithe, thin build of a gymnast when in it. Whereas 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man featured a new story set explicitly after the events of the movie it was named for, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 goes with the more tried-and-true method of presenting an alternate and expanded retelling of its namesake's narrative. In theory, there's nothing wrong with this approach, and indeed it was the same one used for 2004's Spider-Man 2, which to this day is considered by many to be the high-water mark for Spider-Man video games. Unfortunately, though, in the case of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the weakest part of the game actually tends to be when it is focused on plot points from the film, and it seems likely that Beenox were at least originally intending for ASM2 to follow in the footsteps of its predecessor and act as a sequel of sorts to the movie it is named after. Nowhere is this clearer than in the simple fact that this supposed adaptation of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 film does not feature any appearances whatsoever by Gwen Stacy. And as anyone who's seen the ASM2 film can attest, the complete absence of Gwen in this case is all kinds of nuts. For that matter, the moments in ASM2 featuring Electro and the Green Goblin going through their respective origin stories tends to feel like equally token affairs. It's also rather telling that ASM2's climax and final boss battle does not even involve either of the central villains from the film, and indeed, overall it's the non-movie characters like the Kingpin, Carnage, Kraven the Hunter, and the Black Cat who get the lion's shares of attention. Unfortunately, despite some interesting ideas like having Kraven initially serve as a mentor for Peter, even the non-film story elements of ASM2 often end up falling flat, due to not having enough room and time to fully develop. For all the elements of the film are generally treated like afterthoughts, they still manage to rear their head just often enough to interrupt whatever momentum the game's other major storyline might have been developing. Basically, in terms of story, Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a game trying to serve two different masters simultaneously, and as a result, ultimately ends up failing to do either proper justice. This is especially a shame because so many elements of ASM2 feels like a concentrated effort on the part of Beenox to give players the most true-to-character Spider-Man experience yet. The game even goes so far as to include a number of non-combat sequences where players take on the role of Peter in his civilian identity, in order to explore environments and get into branchy dialogue tree-driven conversations that feel like they were heavily inspired by a BioWare game. In theory, I love the idea of trying to make Peter Parker as important to a Spider-Man game as his masked alter ego, especially since some of the best Spider-Man stories of the last 20 years and beyond have done the same. Unfortunately, the actual execution of these scenes more often than not falls flat, such as one extended sequence set at a high-end party where multiple characters refer to Peter being in this suit, despite his standard casually dressed character model being used. As an aside, ASM2 in general suffers from poor character models that look as if the developers could not make up their minds between a more stylized visual approach and a more realistic one. Nor is this the only area where a good faith effort on the part of Beenox to capture the feel of a Spider-Man comic ends up blowing up in the player's face horribly. Take the so-called Hero or Menace meter, which operates somewhat similarly to the Wanted meter in GTA, and in theory is clearly meant to try and give players the same feeling of bad Parker luck and hard choices that so often haunts Peter in his ongoing monthly adventures. In practice, however, it is perhaps the single worst gameplay addition to ever be thrust upon a Spider-Man video game, and one that at times comes close to making the entire game nigh unplayable. The way it works is like this. As in the first ASM game, various side activities such as carjackings, robberies, fires, and standoffs between the police and gang members will regularly pop up on ASM2's world map. And when I say like the first game, I mean exactly like it, since almost all of these side activities have been transplanted directly from Amazing Spider-Man 1 with nary a single change. Unlike the first game, however, which largely kept such challenges as a strictly optional affair, in ASM2, players will have to constantly complete them in order to keep the Hero or Menace meter in the blue and prevent waves of increasingly powerful and dangerous armored troops, drones, and glider patrols from attacking Spidey while traversing Amazing 2's open world. Even worse, if players don't complete an active challenge within a certain time, usually under 2 minutes, the game will consider it failed and will dock the Hero or Menace meter as a result. Keep in mind that by around the halfway point of the game, there will always be at least a dozen or more challenges active on the map at all times, and scattered to the four corners of the world map, and you are likely starting to see the problem. The game tries to mitigate this by resetting the clock for all active challenges when starting and completing a challenge or story mission, or when traveling to Peter's home, where among other things he can swap costumes. But even so, it can be far too easy to go from a full hero meter to a full menace meter in the time it takes to travel from one part of the map to the other. And of course, the game has no fast travel because that actually might make this awful system more bearable. Also, when the Menace meter is active, often portions of the city map, including locations that players will need to visit in order to start various story missions, can become completely sealed off from Spidey by way of portable energy shields. This in turn means that players will need to scramble around the map, finding challenges to complete in order to build back up the meter, and then hope they can race back to the desired location quickly enough to prevent the whole mess from starting all over again. Oh, and to add insult to injury, the Hero or Menace meter remains in effect even after players have beaten the game's story, so there's no escaping this disaster of a gameplay system ever. The hero or menace system can be annoying to the point of almost making one want to simply quit the game outright at times, which is too bad because beyond it, the actual combat and stealth portions of Amazing Spider-Man 2's gameplay are substantially improved over the original game. Admittedly, both of these aspects of the title remain every bit the blatant clones of the Arkham series that they were in the original Amazing Spider-Man, but at least they're copying from the best. This time around, combat, for example, does a better job capturing the fact that unlike Batman, Spider-Man actually has full-on super strength and other powers. Meanwhile, also unlike the first ASM, ASM 2 features environments for its stealth portions that feel like they were actually designed with Spider-Man's abilities in mind, which makes stealth in general both more fair and more satisfying. Indeed, the story missions in ASM 2 are much more engaging and unique than their ASM counterparts, and they make for a really fun experience if you can overlook all the annoyances with the open world side of the game. ASM 2 also includes a new web swinging mechanic, which requires players to actually have a building or object nearby for the webbing to stick to, and it also maps each web shooter to a specific button. It can take some getting used to, but once mastered, it makes for a fun and convincing new take on one of Spidey's signature abilities, and if not for the dreadful hero or menace system, the simple act of web swinging in ASM 2 could have been plenty captivating in and of itself. For that matter, ASM 2 abounds with countless little touches, such as the way it makes use of Stan Lee in a role that not only perfectly fits the man, but even manages some surprisingly genuine emotional resonance by story's end. That makes it clear that people at Beanox really do get and understand Spider-Man as a character. The game has its flaws, but after 4 Spider-Man games in a row, I'd wager a lack of passion on the part of its developers towards the character is not one of them. Instead, I suspect forces largely beyond their control are to blame, including the fact that, to put it bluntly, ASM 2 feels like a game that needed at least another 6 months of development time, if not more. Nowhere is this clearer than in the game's remarkably lackluster visuals, that not only fall short of more recent similar open-world superhero titles like Infamous Second Son, but even fail to measure up to examples from several years ago such as Batman Arkham City. I played the game on both PS4 and PS3, and found little real difference of note between the two versions visually, and frankly, if you have the option, you're better off going with the less expensive last-gen version in this case. I want to stress that for all its flaws, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is still leaps and bounds a better game than such past Spidey titles as Spider-Man 3 and Web of Shadows. And indeed, ASM 2 is a decent enough experience when all is said and done, but there are noticeable hints throughout that it could have been so much more. Score, 7 out of 10, good. Recommendation, for fans only.